The rain had not stopped for 3 days in Vicksburg. The swollen Mississippi rolled like a dark, endless serpent beyond the broken levees, carrying with it driftwood, wreckage, and the smell of rot. The city, once a proud Confederate stronghold, now stood hollow, its streets silent except for the sound of boots echoing through puddles and the occasional cry of a starving dog. The war had ended 2 years ago, but in Vicksburg, 1867 still felt like 1865. The scars had never healed, and for some they never would. In a small cottage at the edge of town, behind a church that had lost its cross to cannon fire, a single candle burned through the night. Its light trembled against the rain-streaked window, where a woman sat in silence, her face hidden beneath a black veil. She was known to the townsfolk as Evelyn Hart, though few dared to speak her name aloud. To the Union men who still patrolled the streets, she was simply the widow. Before we dive deeper into this disturbing story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden stories. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now for you? I love seeing how far these untold truths reach. Her husband, Captain Thomas Hart of the Union Army, had been among the first to die when Vicksburg fell. He had ridden into the city under a white flag to negotiate surrender, only to be shot dead by a Confederate sniper hiding in the bell tower. The killer was never caught, though whispers said it had been one of Colonel Merriweather's men, a ghost of the Old South who still stalked the ruins under new names. For Evelyn, grief had not come as tears. It had come as silence and then as purpose. For 2 years she lived like a shadow. Her neighbors saw her tending the small garden behind her home, or visiting the churchyard with a bouquet of lilies. But they did not see her at night, when she changed her morning gown for the coarse coat and hat of a man, and vanished into the fog. She learned to walk like them, to speak in their rough drawl, to drink whiskey without coughing. She dyed her hair with soot, wrapped her chest in linen, and took the name Elias Hartwell. To the few who met her in the dark corners of taverns and railway depots, she was just another drifter from Tennessee looking for work. No one noticed the glint of cold calculation behind her eyes, or the faint scar beneath her left ear, a mark left by a bullet the day she had been widowed. What the town did not know, what no one knew, was that Evelyn had begun to hunt. Her first target had been a man named Silas Wren, a former Confederate lieutenant who now ran a gambling hall near the waterfront. He had been among the sharpshooters stationed in the bell tower the day Thomas Hart died. Evelyn had tracked him for months, listening to rumors whispered by old soldiers and war widows alike. She learned his habits, his debts, and the nights he drank himself unconscious. On a rain-slick evening in February, she walked into his gambling hall dressed in a gray coat and wide-brimmed hat. A deck of cards lay in front of him, his laughter booming over the clatter of coins. She joined the game without a word. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, steadier, practiced. "How's your aim these days, Lieutenant?" she asked, sliding a revolver card across the table. He frowned, trying to place her face, but before memory could surface, she pulled a small derringer from her sleeve and shot him once through the heart. The gunshot echoed through the hall, freezing every soul in the room. By the time the sheriff arrived, Elias Hartwell was gone, vanished into the mist, leaving only a single white lily on the dead man's chest. In Vicksburg, they called it justice. In the Confederate circles, they called it vengeance. By the spring of 1867, rumors of the widow hunter began to spread across Mississippi. Men whispered about a figure who moved through the night dressed in black, killing those who had once worn the gray. Some said it was the ghost of a Union soldier. Others, that it was a bounty hunter working for the Reconstruction officers. None guessed the truth, that it was a woman, avenging her husband in the only way she knew. Evelyn never kept trophies, never lingered to see her work. Each man she killed had some tie to that fateful day, the day the bell tower echoed with a single gunshot that stole her world. She found them in river towns and roadside inns, in the lawless spaces where the South still refused to surrender. And with each death, her resolve hardened. But vengeance has a way of leaving trails, and soon her quiet war drew the attention of men who were not supposed to care. Colonel Merriweather, the same man whose name had haunted her since her husband's death, was said to have escaped Union capture after Appomattox. He had vanished into the woods of Louisiana, taking with him a band of loyal soldiers. They called themselves the Redeemers, men determined to restore the South by any means necessary. When word reached Meriwether that someone was hunting his men, he laughed. "Let the ghost come," he reportedly said. "I'll send her back to her grave." That summer, Evelyn began to hear their whispers too. Strangers in the taverns she frequented would glance over their shoulders and lower their voices when she passed. A bounty had been placed on Elias Hartwell, $500 dead or alive. Posters with her alias appeared on telegraph poles across the state. The irony wasn't lost on her. A widow hunted for avenging the man who had died under a white flag. She burned every poster she found. Then one night she received a letter. It came folded inside a worn Union envelope, delivered by a boy who said he'd been paid to drop it at her door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, bold, masculine, steady. Inside, a single sentence. "The man you seek is in Natchez." No signature. No return address. Only a faint trace of tobacco and gunpowder on the paper. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She packed what little she owned, a pistol, a knife, and her husband's Union badge, and left before dawn. The road to Natchez was long and dangerous. The Reconstruction patrols were scattered, and much of the countryside had fallen into lawlessness. Bridges were burned, rail lines torn up, and entire towns abandoned to bandits. Yet Evelyn rode through it all, her resolve like steel. She passed fields where the bones of soldiers still surfaced after heavy rains, their rusted buttons gleaming under the sun. She saw widows standing at fences, staring toward roads where husbands never returned. By the time she reached Natchez, the city was alive again, but in a strange, hollow way. The war's wounds had been dressed but not healed. There were saloons filled with men who spoke too loudly, women who laughed too hard, and children who had learned to run before they learned to read. And somewhere in that maze of streets and riverboats, Evelyn believed Meriwether was hiding. She found lodging at a boarding house overlooking the river. The owner, Mrs. Caldwell, was a stern woman who had lost 2 sons to the war, one Union, one Confederate. Her bitterness hung in the air like the smell of coal. But when Evelyn mentioned she was looking for work, the old woman nodded. "The docks always need hands," she said. "But keep your head down. The past has long fingers here." It was good advice. For days, Evelyn watched the docks. She studied every man who came and went, river traders, deserters, soldiers of fortune. Then, one evening, as the sun bled over the horizon and the river turned to molten gold, she saw him. Colonel Meriwether. He was older now, heavier around the shoulders, but unmistakable. His once proud uniform had been replaced by a fine linen suit, his beard trimmed, his cane tipped with silver. Yet his eyes still held that same cruel arrogance she remembered from the war. He was boarding a riverboat bound for Louisiana. Her pulse quickened, but she did not move. Not yet. Instead, she followed from a distance, boarding the same vessel under the name Elias Hartwell. The journey would take 3 days down the river, a slow descent into the swamps where law and order no longer reached. The boat's lower deck reeked of sweat and whiskey. Soldiers, gamblers, and traders filled the narrow corridors. Evelyn kept to herself, watching Meriwether from the shadows. He played cards most nights, surrounded by men who spoke in low voices and carried themselves like killers. She listened, learning their patterns, their loyalties. On the second night, a storm struck. Thunder rolled across the river, shaking the boat like a child's toy. Lightning illuminated the sky in violent flashes, and for a moment Evelyn saw Meriwether standing alone on the upper deck, staring into the black water. She approached slowly, the rain soaking through her coat. Her hand rested on the pistol at her side. Every step felt like an echo of the past, the bell tower, the gunshot, the years of emptiness that followed. But when she was close enough to see his face, something unexpected happened. Meriwether turned. His expression was calm, almost knowing. "I was wondering when you'd find me," he said. Evelyn froze. He smiled faintly. "You wear your disguise well, Widow Hart." The words cut through her like glass. For the first time in 2 years, she felt fear. Not for her life, but for the possibility that he had been waiting for her all along. Before she could draw her weapon, he raised his cane and pressed the silver tip against her chest. "There's a time and place for ghosts," he murmured. "Yours has come too soon." Then, from the shadows behind him, 2 men stepped outside. The rain began again, steady, endless, like the heartbeat of a dying land, and the widow of Vicksburg vanished into the river's mist, bound for a reckoning that had only just begun. Forward. The lightning flashed again, and she saw their faces. Rough, familiar, the kind that had once laughed over dying Union soldiers. Evelyn reached for her pistol, but too late. One of the men struck her across the head with the butt of a rifle. The world spun. The rain became a blur. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the Mississippi, wide and merciless, swallowing the light. When she awoke, she was bound. Her wrists were tied to the wooden rail of a small cabin below deck. A lantern swung above her, creaking with the motion of the boat. Merriweather sat across from her, pouring himself a drink, his eyes fixed on her face. "You've been busy," he said, almost admiringly. "Silas Wren, Carter Hayes, all dead. And now you came for me." Evelyn said nothing. He sipped his whiskey, then leaned forward. "Tell me, widow, did it help? Did killing them fill that empty grave inside you?" She stared back, her lip bleeding, her silence sharper than any words. He smiled faintly. "I suppose not." He stood, adjusting his coat. "You see, my dear, the war may be over for some, but not for us. There's still work to be done, and I think you'll be useful to me alive." At that, he nodded to one of his men. The ropes were tightened. The cabin door closed. The lantern light dimmed. Outside, the rain began again, steady, endless, like the heartbeat of a dying land, and the widow of Vicksburg vanished into the river's mist, bound for a reckoning that had only just begun. The river carried them south, its current thick with mud and memory. The creak of wood, the low rumble of the paddle wheel, and the soft hiss of rain against the deck formed an unholy lullaby. Below, in the dim light of the lantern, Evelyn Hart lay bound to a chair, wrists swollen from rope, her breath shallow. She could smell the dampness of the cabin, a mix of whiskey, gun oil, and river rot. Every sound above her head felt like a threat, a boot step, a laugh, the clang of a bottle. She was alive. For now. Her head still throbbed from the blow. When she lifted her gaze, Merriweather was seated opposite, his coat neatly buttoned, his silver cane leaning against the wall. He had the calmness of a man who had learned to enjoy control, the kind who saw cruelty as a tool of order. "I would have thought you dead by now," he said without looking up. "Most ghosts fade with time. But you," he smirked, eyes narrowing, "you've been haunting my men for years." Evelyn said nothing. "You tracked them well," he continued, pouring himself another glass of whiskey. "Silas Wren in Vicksburg, Carter near Jackson, Hayes outside Meridian. 3 of my best. Gone because of you." He lifted the glass in a mock toast. "A widow turned executioner. You must be proud." Her wrists twisted against the rope, the fibers cutting into her skin. She stared at him through strands of wet hair. "You killed my husband," she said, her voice quiet, raw. He stopped mid-sip. "Your husband," he repeated. "Ah, yes. The Union officer with the white flag. A decent man, I'm sure. But the war wasn't decent, Mrs. Hart. It made animals of us all. You shot him under truce." He smiled faintly. "Did I?" He leaned closer. "You're certain of that?" "I saw you in the tower," she hissed. "You were the one who fired." For a moment, silence filled the cabin, the kind that feels like the moment before thunder breaks. Merriweather's eyes hardened. "You saw a shadow, widow, nothing more. But perhaps shadows are what you've been chasing ever since." He stood and crossed the room, stopping beside her. The floorboards groaned beneath his boots. "You could have lived your life in peace. A quiet house, a few flowers by his grave. But instead you chose war, again." Her voice trembled with anger. "Peace doesn't exist for those who bury honor." Merriweather regarded her for a long moment, then nodded toward his men outside. "We'll reach Baton Rouge by morning," he said. "From there, you'll come with us to the plantation. You'll learn what it means to lose everything." He left without another word. The door slammed, and Evelyn was alone. For hours she sat in the dark, the boat swaying beneath her. She thought of Thomas, his voice, his hands, the way he had laughed before the war took it all away. Every image of him felt fragile now, like a memory trying to survive inside a storm, and yet she clung to it. She tested the ropes again. They held tight, but she could feel one knot shifting against the wood. Slowly, carefully, she began to twist her wrists, ignoring the pain as blood smeared the fibers. Above, thunder rolled again. The boat lurched as it turned sharply downriver. The lantern swung violently, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Evelyn's fingers slipped beneath one knot, almost free. Then footsteps. She froze. The door creaked open and a young man stepped inside. Barely 20, thin, nervous, the kind of soldier who had been too young for war but too poor for peace. He carried a pistol at his hip and a bottle in his hand. "You awake?" he asked, his accent heavy with the drawl of the Deep South. Evelyn didn't answer. He stepped closer, the bottle sloshing. "You don't look like much," he muttered. "Can't believe the colonel's scared of you." Still, she said nothing. He crouched beside her, his breath sour with drink. "They say you killed 6 men," he said. "That true?" Her eyes met his. 7. The boy blinked, and before he could react, she twisted her wrists sharply. The loosened rope slipped free, and in a single motion, she drove her bound hands upward, catching him by the throat. He gasped, dropped the bottle, and struggled, but she was faster. Her knee struck his gut. The pistol clattered to the floor. She seized it, one shot. The sound exploded through the cabin. Above, shouts erupted. Evelyn tore the remaining rope from her wrists, her hands bleeding. She grabbed the lantern and smashed it against the door. Flames caught the wood instantly. Smoke began to fill the narrow space as she kicked the door open and stumbled into the corridor. The deck was chaos. Men shouted orders, the smell of fire mixing with rain. She pushed through the crowd, ducking behind barrels and crates. Merriweather's voice cut through the storm, sharp, commanding. "Find her, dead or alive!" She climbed the narrow stairway to the upper deck, her body aching. The river wind hit her face like cold knives. Lightning split the sky, revealing the vast black water below. A gunshot whistled past her ear. Another followed. She turned, saw one of Merriweather's men leveling his rifle. She fired back. The man dropped, his body sliding across the wet boards. She ran to the edge of the deck. Below, the river churned, dark, deep, merciless. There was no choice. She holstered the pistol, took one breath, and leapt. The water hit like stone. The cold swallowed her, dragged her down. She fought, kicking against the current, her lungs burning. When she surfaced, the riverboat was already a blur of fire and shadow behind her. She drifted for what felt like hours, clinging to a piece of wreckage. The rain softened, the night stretched on. When dawn finally broke, she washed up on a muddy riverbank miles downstream. Evelyn lay there for a long time, motionless, staring at the sky. The storm had passed, but her war had not. By mid-afternoon, she was walking again. Barefoot, soaked, every step heavy with exhaustion. The land around her was wild and half-drowned. The Louisiana Delta, a place where even law feared to tread. She came upon a small cabin deep in the cypress woods, smoke curling from its chimney. An old woman stood at the door, her skin weathered like bark, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You from the river?" the woman asked. Evelyn nodded weakly. The woman gestured inside. "Ain't the first it's taken." "Come on then. You look half dead." Inside, the air was warm with the smell of herbs and stew. Evelyn collapsed onto a wooden chair as the woman tended to her wounds with rough kindness. "Name's Alma," she said. "Been here since before the war. Folks come through, I help when I can." Evelyn hesitated, then spoke. "Elias," she said softly. "Elias Hartwell." Alma raised an eyebrow. "Ain't no Elias I ever met with eyes like yours." She smiled faintly. "But don't worry. I keep my own secrets." Days passed in that small cabin. Evelyn's strength returned, but so did her memories. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Merriweather's smirk, heard his voice. The thought that he still lived gnawed at her like rust on steel. On the 4th night, she woke to the sound of thunder, not from the sky, but from hooves, riders, voices shouting in the distance. Alma looked out the window. "You brought them, didn't you?" Evelyn stood, already reaching for her pistol. "They won't stop," the old woman sighed. "Then you best not either." She pulled a shotgun from behind the hearth and handed it to her. "Out the back. Follow the bayou north. There's a trading post near St. Francisville. You might find help there, or trouble." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Alma's eyes softened. Go. And if you live long enough to find what you're looking for, make sure it's worth finding. Evelyn slipped into the swamp as torches flared behind her. Voices carried through the trees, Merryweather's men, close and cruel. The air was thick with fog and the cries of unseen creatures. She moved silently, every step careful, the mud sucking at her boots. The bayou was endless, black water, twisted roots, hanging moss that looked like the dead reaching down. She waded waist-deep through the current, mosquitoes biting at her skin. Somewhere behind her, a dog barked. She froze. Then another bark, closer. The torches were coming. Evelyn raised her pistol and fired once into the air, not at them, but at the swamp itself. The echo rolled through the mist, startling the birds. She ducked low, slipping beneath the roots of a cypress tree, holding her breath as the riders passed. Their lights drifted by like ghosts. Voices faded. Silence returned. When she emerged, the night was almost gone. She followed the faint sound of the river until she saw a light ahead, a flickering lamp outside a small trading post. Inside, a handful of men sat playing cards. A piano played softly in the corner. Evelyn pushed open the door, her presence drawing stares. Mud, blood, and determination clung to her like armor. The barkeep, a tall man with gray eyes, frowned. "You look like hell." "Been there," she muttered. He nodded toward her pistol. "If you're bringing trouble, take it outside." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm looking for a man named Merryweather." The room went still. The barkeep studied her. "Never heard of him." Evelyn held his gaze. "Then you're lying." Before he could respond, the door swung open behind her. A gust of cold air swept in, and with it 3 men in Confederate coats. Their boots dripped with swamp water. Their faces were hard, familiar. The barkeep's eyes flicked to Evelyn. "Looks like your ghosts found you." Evelyn turned slowly. The tallest of the 3 smiled. "Colonel sends his regards," he said. The next moment exploded into violence. Evelyn dove behind the counter as bullets shattered bottles and glass. The barkeep cursed and grabbed his rifle. Patrons scattered, overturning tables. Evelyn fired back twice. One shot struck a man in the chest, another grazed the wall. The air filled with gunpowder and chaos. When the last echo faded, 2 bodies lay motionless on the floor. The third crawled toward the door, blood trailing behind him. Evelyn caught him by the collar, pressing her pistol to his jaw. "Where is Merryweather?" she demanded. The man gasped, eyes wild. He's gone south, Bayou Laveau. Big house, old plantation." He said he'd finish what he started. She released him. The man collapsed, wheezing. Evelyn holstered her weapon and turned to the barkeep. "I need a horse." He stared at her, then nodded toward the stables. "Take the black mare. She's fast, but if you go down that way, you best not come back." Evelyn pushed through the swinging doors and into the dawn. The swamp was awakening, mist rising like smoke, the air heavy with the scent of cypress and decay. She mounted the horse and rode south. Every mile brought her closer to the past she had been chasing for 2 years. Merryweather's plantation, the place where the last ghosts of the Confederacy still hid behind silk curtains and dying pride. The road narrowed into a dirt path. Spanish moss hung low, whispering against her shoulders. The house appeared through the trees, massive, decaying, its white columns cracked and veined with ivy. She dismounted, pistol ready. The front doors stood open, as if expecting her. Inside, the silence was thick. Dust motes floated through beams of light. The portraits of forgotten soldiers watched from the walls, their painted eyes dull and accusing. And at the far end of the hall, seated in a high-backed chair, was Colonel Merryweather. He was waiting. "Welcome home." "Widow," he said quietly. Evelyn raised her pistol. "You should have stayed dead." He smiled faintly. "Death and I have never been well acquainted." She took a step closer. "That's about to change." Merryweather's hand moved fast, too fast for a man his age. A hidden pistol flashed from beneath his coat. 2 shots cracked through the stillness. Evelyn staggered backward, the impact throwing her against the wall. Pain tore through her side. She gasped, clutching the wound, her vision blurring. Merryweather rose slowly, walking toward her. "You could have been a legend," he said softly. "But legends die just like everyone else." Evelyn's hand trembled. The pistol slipped from her grasp. Her knees buckled. Merriweather stood over her, the barrel aimed at her heart. "Goodbye, widow." But before he could fire, a shadow moved behind him, swift and silent. A crack of wood against bone. Merriweather collapsed, his gun clattering across the floor. Evelyn blinked through the haze. A figure stood above him. Alma, the old woman from the swamp, clutching the same shotgun she had offered days before. "Told you not to come back," she muttered. Evelyn coughed, blood on her lips. "I didn't plan to." Alma knelt beside her, pressing a hand to the wound. "You ain't done yet." "Not till you make sure he never breathes again." Evelyn's eyes flickered toward the fallen colonel. His body stirred slightly. Her fingers tightened around her pistol, dragging it from the floor. She leveled it at his chest. Her voice was barely a whisper. "For Thomas." The gun roared once more. The Mississippi sun had begun to turn bronze by the time Amelia reached the edge of Jackson. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and dust, the remnants of the last skirmish that had rattled the outskirts days before. The war might have been declared over on paper, but in the hearts of men, vengeance had not yet signed its truce. In those shadowed places between peace and retribution, Amelia found her purpose sharpening like a blade. She stopped at a small trading post, a half-collapsed shack where the shelves still carried tins of dried corn and weevil-infested flour. Behind the counter stood a man with a scar that ran across his cheek, the kind of scar men earn when they survive something meant to kill them. His name was Levi Cole, a former Union scout who'd lost his left eye in a Confederate ambush. He looked at Amelia with the suspicious gaze of a man who'd seen too many masks and too few honest faces. "You travel alone, ma'am?" he asked, wiping a knife with a dirty rag. Amelia nodded. "I'm heading south. Heard there are bounties still unpaid." He chuckled, a dry sound. "You're a few years too late for that kind of gold." Amelia leaned in closer. "I'm not after gold." Levi's one good eye narrowed. He studied her, and then without another word, walked to a shelf, pulling down an old map of the Yazoo Basin. His voice dropped low. "There's a camp. Not official. Ex-soldiers, Confederates who won't let go. They call themselves the Pale Riders. They burn what they can't own and hang what they can't forgive. You head south, you'll find them." Amelia took the map, her hand steady, her voice colder. "Then that's where I need to be." That night she rode beneath a sky bruised with violet clouds. Each hoofbeat echoed like a memory. She remembered Thomas, her husband's last letter, folded in her apron, its edges worn soft by her trembling fingers. "If I don't come back, promise me you'll live without hate." But Amelia had long since broken that promise. Hate had become her heartbeat, her armor, her compass. By the third day she reached the ruins of an old cotton mill, the one Levi had marked on the map. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney made of stones and rusted barrels. Around it, men drank, laughed, and played cards on overturned crates. Amelia's heart pounded beneath her disguise. She adjusted her hat, lowered her voice, and rode straight into the lion's den. "Evenin', boys," she said, her accent coarse and masculine. "Heard you might be looking for another hand." A burly man with a red beard squinted at her. "You from Vicksburg?" "Used to be," she replied, her eyes never flinching. "Lost everything when the Yanks torched my farm." The man nodded slowly, his suspicion easing. "Then you're one of us." Over the next few days, Amelia lived among them. The Pale Riders were ghosts of a dead cause, former Confederate cavalrymen who refused to surrender to peace. They spoke of lost glory and righteous vengeance, of punishing those who betrayed the South. But beneath the whiskey and bravado, Amelia saw what they truly were: frightened, broken men clinging to hatred because it was all they had left. Each night she memorized their faces, their names, the things they bragged about when they thought no one was listening. There was Colonel Maddox, who once ordered his men to torch a farmhouse with women still inside. There was Jeb Callahan, who wore a necklace of brass buttons he'd taken off Union corpses. And there was Silas Boone, tall, hollow-eyed, the one who led the charge through Vicksburg, the one who, Amelia later learned, had commanded the squad that killed Thomas. That name sat in her mind like a wound that refused to close. One evening, A thunderstorm broke across the Mississippi plains. The men gathered inside the mill, playing cards under flickering lantern light. Lightning flashed through the broken windows, illuminating Amelia's face for a moment, just long enough for Boone to notice something strange in her eyes. "You're a quiet one," he muttered, watching her over his cards. "Most new boys talk too much. You don't talk at all." "Talkin' never won a war," she said calmly. Boone smirked. "You're right about that. But silence'll get you killed quicker." Amelia looked away, pretending not to notice the weight of his stare. But she knew then that Boone had doubts, small, creeping suspicions that could undo her. So she moved carefully, like a ghost among wolves. When the rain stopped, Boone ordered a ride. "Need to check the old supply routes," he said, tossing her a rifle. "You're coming with me." The road stretched long and empty, trees whispering with the wind. Boone rode beside her in silence until they reached a clearing near the river. There he dismounted, staring out across the water, his reflection trembling like a haunted memory. "You ever lose someone?" he asked suddenly. Amelia's throat tightened. "Ain't we all?" Boone nodded. "I lost brothers, friends, a cause worth dying for." He paused, glancing at her. "But something tells me you lost more than most." For a moment, Amelia almost broke, almost let the tears slip past the mask, but she bit them back. "Loss don't matter," she said softly. "What matters is what you do with it." Boone smiled faintly. "Then maybe we ain't so different." That night, Amelia returned to the camp shaken. Boone's words clung to her like smoke. He was the man who'd killed her husband, yet there was something hollow in him now, a grief that mirrored her own. It terrified her how human he seemed, because vengeance thrives best when the enemy is faceless. But Boone's face was carved by guilt, and guilt made him real. Still, her purpose remained. 2 nights later, Amelia made her move. The men were deep in drink, their laughter echoing off the broken beams of the mill. She slipped into Boone's tent, her breath steady, her knife gleaming in the dim light. Boone lay asleep, one hand resting near his revolver. She raised the blade, but then he stirred, mumbling something. Amelia froze. He whispered, "Thomas." "Forgive me." Her heart stopped. The knife trembled in her grip. She stepped back, eyes wide, as realization clawed at her chest. Boone had remembered the name, Thomas, her husband's name. In that instant, she saw not a monster, but a man drowning in the same ocean of loss. Her rage, so long her anchor, faltered. The blade lowered an inch, just 1 inch, and then from outside a voice shouted, "She's no man!" Amelia spun, too late. Levi Cole burst through the flap, his pistol raised, his one good eye burning with fury. He'd followed her, perhaps to stop her, perhaps to claim his own vengeance. But now the camp was awake, chaos spilling into the night. Boone sat up, confusion turning to rage as he saw the truth beneath Amelia's disguise. "You," he hissed. "You're one of them." She ran, through mud, through fire, through the storm of bullets that tore through the camp. Horses screamed, men shouted, the air filled with gunpowder and betrayal. Amelia didn't stop until she reached the riverbank. The moon hung high above the water, pale and merciless. Behind her, flames devoured the mill. The Pale Riders were finished, their leader exposed, their secrets undone. But Boone still lived. She could feel it. And as she stood there, soaked and trembling, Amelia knew one truth that pierced deeper than any bullet. Vengeance was no longer a mission. It was a curse, one she could not escape until Boone was dead. She mounted her horse, turned south, and vanished into the dark. The widow of Vicksburg rode again. The river carried her south through silence and fog. Days blurred into one another, the waters thick with the reflection of ghostly cypress trees and the weight of unspoken memories. Amelia sat upright in the saddle, her cloak torn, her hat lost to the wind, her revolver slick with the mud of the Yazoo. The world seemed emptied of everything but her breath and the sound of hooves striking damp earth. Behind her, the Pale Riders had scattered into the wilderness, hunted now by their own pasts. Levi Cole's bullet had grazed her arm before he vanished into the smoke. She had no idea if he lived. Boone's face haunted her, the moment he whispered her husband's name, the guilt in his eyes, the confusion as the world around him burned. The more she tried to hate him, the more the hatred twisted, uncertain, shapeless. When she reached the edge of Natchez, she found the ruins of a war hospital turned into a shelter for widows and orphans. The building leaned to one side, its walls still streaked with soot from cannon fire. There, amid the ghosts of war, Amelia collapsed. Fever claimed her for 3 days. On the 4th, she woke to the smell of boiled herbs and the sound of soft humming. A woman with graying hair sat beside her cot, mending a blanket with fingers that trembled from old age. "You've been out cold, child," the woman said, voice gentle. "Name's Mercy. You're safe here." Amelia didn't reply. Her mind wandered between memory and nightmare. The burning mill, Boone's whisper, Thomas's last letter. Mercy must have seen the torment in her eyes because she touched Amelia's hand and said, "The war may be over, but the killing ain't stopped inside us yet." Amelia stared at her. "You lost someone too?" "Everyone," Mercy said simply. "My husband, both my sons. One wore blue, the other gray. The bullets didn't care which side they were on." For the first time in years, Amelia's chest softened. She stayed there for weeks, helping the women gather firewood, reading letters for those who could no longer see. The children followed her like shadows, their laughter foreign and beautiful. It was the first time she'd allowed herself to rest, to imagine something beyond vengeance. But peace never stays long when your heart is tied to the past. One morning, while washing clothes near the river, Amelia overheard a group of men talking near the docks. Their voices carried on the wind, sharp, drunk, cruel. She didn't mean to listen, but then she heard a name that froze her blood. Boone. "He's holed up near the Gulf," one said. "Calls himself a preacher now. Says he's found God." The others laughed. "God don't want the likes of him." "Maybe not," the first replied. "But the man's got followers. Former soldiers, drifters, folks who still think the South's got one more fight left in it." Amelia's grip on the wet cloth tightened until her knuckles turned white. Boone alive. Boone preaching. Boone leading men again. That night she left the shelter. No farewell, no note. Mercy found her empty bed at dawn and whispered a prayer into the morning light. Amelia rode south through marshland and moss, following rumors that led her toward the Gulf Coast. The air grew heavier, the trees draped in long strands of Spanish moss like the hair of mourning ghosts. She stopped in small towns and listened for Boone's name in taverns and markets. Some said he'd become a man of God, preaching redemption in the ruins of abandoned churches. Others said he was building something darker, a militia cloaked in scripture, armed in secret. Weeks later, she reached the outskirts of a town called St. Mary's Hollow. The church stood at the edge of a bayou, its steeple cracked, its bell long fallen. Light flickered inside, lanterns, not candles, and the sound of men's voices rose like low thunder. She crept closer, her boots sinking into the wet earth. Through a broken window she saw Boone standing at the pulpit. He was thinner now, his beard streaked with gray, his uniform replaced by a preacher's coat. But his voice, steady, commanding, was the same voice that had sent her husband to his grave. "Brothers," Boone said, "we were soldiers once. Now we are soldiers of faith. The war may be over, but the cause remains, in our hearts, in our blood." The men before him cheered. Amelia counted 8, maybe 10, each armed. They hung on his words like disciples. Boone spoke of resurrection, not of Christ, but of the South. He promised redemption through fire, a second cleansing. And as the men shouted, "Amen," Amelia realized he had traded one God for another, vengeance disguised as salvation. That night, as the church emptied, she watched him step outside alone. His breath misted in the cold air, his hands trembling as he leaned against the fence. The preacher's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the same broken soul she had seen by the river. She could have killed him then. One pull of the trigger, and it would be over. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice low and steady. "You found your God after all." Boone turned sharply, eyes widening as he recognized her. "You. I came to finish what you started." He didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he looked at her with something almost like sorrow. "If you'd killed me that night, maybe you'd have found peace." "Peace?" She spat. "My husband's bones are buried in ash because of you." Boone nodded slowly. "Yes, and every night since I've asked God to let me die for it. But he won't. Maybe he sent you to do what he won't." The wind rustled through the trees, whispering through the moss like the voices of the dead. Amelia raised her pistol. Then maybe it's time he got his wish. But Boone stepped closer, unarmed, his voice breaking. If killing me will bring him back, do it. But if it won't, if it only keeps him dead and you hollow, then maybe you've already lost more than I ever did. The words cut deeper than any bullet could. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. Amelia's hand trembled. She saw Thomas's face, Boone's face, her own reflection in the water. 3 ghosts bound by the same war. Then a gunshot cracked the night. But it wasn't hers. One of Boone's men had returned for his forgotten rifle. Seeing Amelia's silhouette in the moonlight, he fired without hesitation. The bullet struck her shoulder, spinning her backward. Boone shouted, grabbing her before she fell. Another shot followed, grazing his side. "Run," he hissed. "Go." But she didn't. Even wounded, Amelia raised her pistol and fired twice. The man at the doorway fell. Smoke filled the air. The smell of gunpowder, sweat, and blood mingled with the scent of moss. Boone slumped against the fence, breathing hard. "You shouldn't have done that," Amelia whispered. "Maybe not," Boone murmured, his voice fading. "But maybe now. We're both free." He slid to the ground, eyes closing, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. Amelia stared down at him, at the man she had chased across half the South. For a long time she said nothing. Then she dropped her revolver, the sound echoing through the empty churchyard. She turned toward the bayou, where dawn was breaking in pale gold light. The water rippled softly, carrying away the smoke of the night before. For the first time since Vicksburg burned, Amelia felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow, not peace. Just a vast hollow quiet. The kind that comes when the ghosts have finally stopped screaming. She walked into the mist, one hand pressed to her bleeding shoulder, the other brushing against the locket at her neck, the one that held Thomas's name. Some said she disappeared into the swamps. Others claimed they saw her years later tending to graves near Port Gibson, always in black, always silent. The widow of Vicksburg, they called her still. A woman who hunted the men who killed her husband. And in the end found that vengeance is just another kind of grave. The bayou never gave back what it took. By the time Amelia reached the far edge of the swamp, dawn had risen into a bruised sky, streaked with gold and ash. Her shoulder burned with fever, the bullet wound refusing to close. Every step through the mire felt heavier, slower, as if the earth itself wanted her to stop, to sink beneath the still waters and rest at last among the forgotten dead. But she kept walking. Always walking. The sound of frogs and distant thunder echoed through the moss-choked cypress trees. Somewhere behind her, the church at St. Mary's Hollow stood empty, Boone's blood soaking into its wooden floor, her revolver left beside him. She had not buried him, not prayed, not even looked back. But the image of him kneeling in the mud, whispering, "Maybe now we're both free," followed her like a haunting prayer. Freedom. What did it mean for a woman who had spent years wearing another face, another name, another purpose? By the time the sun climbed fully above the trees, she reached the ruins of an old homestead, a broken fence, a half-buried chimney, and a well filled with stagnant rainwater. There, her strength finally gave out. She fell beside the stones, her breath ragged, her hands trembling as she pulled from her pocket the one thing she had carried through every mile, Thomas's letter. The paper was torn, stained with blood and river water, but the words were still there. "If I don't come back, promise me you'll live without hate. Promise me you'll build something worth remembering." Her tears fell onto the ink. For years she had carried those words like a chain. Now she saw them for what they were. A key she had never used. A rustling came from the edge of the trees. Amelia reached for the knife at her belt, but her fingers were too weak. A figure stepped out, a woman, perhaps 20, wearing a tattered dress and holding a bundle of herbs. Her face was thin, her eyes cautious. "You're hurt," the girl said softly. "You shouldn't be out here." Amelia tried to speak, but her throat was dry. The girl helped her sit, poured water from a flask, and began cleaning the wound. The sting of alcohol burned through the fever, dragging her halfway back to the living. "What's your name?" the girl asked. "Amelia," she whispered. "Amelia Carter." The girl smiled faintly. My mama used to tell stories about a woman named Amelia Carter. Said she rode through Mississippi hunting men who'd killed her husband. Amelia's breath caught. Story, she murmured. People like stories. Was it true? The girl asked quietly. Amelia looked out across the bayou, where the sunlight shimmered on the water like shards of broken glass. Once, she said, but stories have a way of changing what's true. The girl stayed with her through the day. They spoke little. When evening came, Amelia insisted she leave. There's a town a few miles east, she said weakly. You'll find folks there who'll help you. The girl hesitated. What about you? Amelia smiled faintly. Me? I'll rest a while. As the girl disappeared into the forest, Amelia lay back against the stones, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and honeysuckle. She felt the fever climbing again, pulling her toward a softer kind of silence. She thought of Thomas, his voice, his laugh, the way he used to stand at the door of their home before the war, calling her name as the sun went down. She thought of the nights after his death, the masks she wore, the blood she spilled, the faces of the men who had begged for mercy and found none. And she thought of Boone, the man she had hated for so long, who in the end had saved her life. The man who had shown her that vengeance was not justice. It was just another form of grief that refused to die. Her breath grew shallow. The world dimmed to the soft hum of cicadas and the whisper of wind through the trees. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled again, deep and mournful. She could almost hear her husband's voice in it, calm, steady, full of love. You did enough, Amelia. You can stop now. Her fingers brushed the locket at her neck. Inside it, a faded photograph. Thomas in uniform, smiling faintly, his eyes the same color as the Mississippi River at dusk. She pressed it to her heart, a tear sliding down her cheek. I kept my promise, she whispered. Maybe not the way you meant it, but I kept it. The last light of day fell across her face as she closed her eyes. The sound of the bayou faded to a single heartbeat, slow, soft, steady, until it stopped. Months later, a traveler passing through the swamp found the ruins of the homestead. Among the moss and vines, he discovered a small grave marked by a wooden cross. No name, no date, just a locket hanging from a nail driven into the wood. Inside it, a photograph of a soldier and a folded piece of paper. Its words nearly faded by time. He couldn't read all of it, but one line remained clear. Promise me you'll live without hate. Locals say her spirit still lingers near the river, a woman in black who walks the banks at twilight, her footsteps silent, her gaze turned toward the horizon. They call her the Widow of Vicksburg, a legend born of grief sharpened by vengeance, and ended by the fragile mercy of forgiveness. Because even the darkest hearts can find light again, if only for a moment before the dusk. If you love the darkness, stay with us, subscribe, before the lights go out.